Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we're going to be exploring instrumental trance communication, and my guest is one of the foremost people working in that area, Dr. Anabela Cardoso, a former Portuguese diplomat, a former editor of the ITC Journal, the journal no longer in publication for people who are seriously researching instrumental trance communication. She is also author of 3 books: Electronic Voices, Contact with Another Dimension, Electronic Contact with the Dead, What Do the Voices Tell Us?, and Glimpses of Another World, Impressions and Reflections of an EVP Operator. Anabela lives in Spain, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Anabela. It's a real pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, Jeff. The same here. A real pleasure.
You've been experimenting with what we call instrumental trance communication for many decades, and the thing that really impressed me the most about your persistence is exactly that. It's persistence. As I recall it, at one time you kept experimenting on a weekly basis. I think it was for 2 years without any results at all, but you kept going.
That's absolutely true. I did for 2 years. No results. I think it could have been 2012, around that year. For 2 years or a couple of months, less than 2 years, no results. I still will turn on my radios on the days that I had booked with my communicators, and I thought, well, this is something that happens with the so-called paranormal phenomena, as you know better than I do. And I thought, so that's it. Now, because this has happened to other operators, suddenly the voices disappear and they don't come back. But then one day, I was sitting there as usual. Yes, I am a very persistent person. It is true. And suddenly the voices started. And they started with this word in Portuguese, voltamos. We came back. Voltamos. We came back. And again they repeated, voltamos. I don't remember now what else they said, but it started like this. It's the last audio that I published when my first book was published, Electronic Voices, Contact with Another Dimension. And I issued a CD with voices that would illustrate what I said in the book. And this was it even came as an appendix because the book was to be printed, and that's when I got that. At that time, that last we came back voltamos, and I could still include it in the CD that is published, and I was very happy. And from then on, the voices never stopped, although they don't have the initial characteristics, because at the beginning, it was my main communicator who was called, I suppose, well, if names have a meaning, I'm not sure, Carlos de Almeida at Rio do Tempo Group, Zeitstrom in German, station, translated as time stream, that communicated with the Harsch-Fischbach and Adolf Holmes in Germany. Professor Senkowski was one of the great witnesses and One of the people was in constant contact with Zeitstrom. He used to speak with them, with the technician, the high entity, with Dr. Susan Salter of another planet, as she explained. And this book, Senkowski's book, Instrumentale Transcommunication of almost 500 pages, has registered all these dialogues, all the computer texts, all these extraordinary occurrences that happened in Luxembourg and Rivnich in Germany. And one of these interventions by Zeitstrom, time stream, a personality called Carlos de Almeida came into Luxembourg. He spoke in Portuguese. He's Portuguese, not Spanish. He spoke in Portuguese and sending a message to a conference that was going to happen and happened in São Paulo, Brazil. And this was before me. This was before I started experimenting. Must have been 95, more or less 96. One of the last contacts in Luxembourg is of the year 2000. One of the last that we have knowledge of. And so that was when I really started, getting more important contacts, yeah.
So when you talk about Rio do Tempo in Portuguese or Zeitstrom in German,
yeah.
These are stations on the other side where people, deceased people who have technical expertise are working on their end to create a communication center for the purpose of reaching out to people in our three-dimensional world. That's correct, I presume.
That's exactly correct, because that's what the communicators themselves have said. Not only deceased people, let's put it this way, deceased people, deceased scientists, as they informed years ago, years before the starting of ITC, by the 1930s, they already sent messages of this type. And a kind of station, yes, let's call it a transmitting center, which, by the way, William T. Stead, the English writer who perished in the sinking of the Titanic, in one of his books called Blue Island, which I read, he speaks exactly of a center devoted to this kind of communication. He doesn't yet speak about the machines, but he says it's a center from where the contacts with the earth are channeled. Supposedly, they are directed, oriented, guided by high entities of a different nature, not human nature, and by deceased scientists. In the case of Luxembourg, Susan Salter was a physicist, supposedly, as she said, of another planet, physical planet called Varid. Carlos at the time was still here, listening to the communications, where there is somebody in one of my recordings, I could not identify it easily because I have thousands, but he says, like two people talking, and he says, we should speak with Dr. Susan. Her name is Susan Salter. And this was with me, that have no apparent connection with Luxembourg. Of course, I must have a deep connection with all this, I and others. But so he said, let's speak with Dr. Susan. And Carlos heard this. And we were very, of course, interested and happy that she was mentioned. But to say the truth, my contacts are important because I have direct radio voices, very high, of good quality, not all, but many. But the real highly significant contacts were in Luxembourg and in Germany, in Rivenish, with Adolf Holmes, that Professor Stenkovsky followed and was constantly in contact with, and the Harsch-Fischbach in Luxembourg, because the content of those messages is of such significance that I've never seen in the field of the so-called communications with another dimension or with the deceased and so on. This is to say that in these centers, transmitting centers, stations, whatever, supposedly also, because I cannot guarantee these things as it is obvious, there are also some devices, of a different nature, obviously, that connect with ours and that connect with the Earth operator and with the Earth devices, and all that is like a net, a kind of a net. That's how it has been described by the communicators.
And the communicators that you have been working with now for over 20 years tell you that they come from a place called Rio do Tempo in Portuguese.
Carlos de Almeida started by naming Rio do Tempo, which means river of time, yes, Rio, river, do, of, tempo, time. Rio do Tempo, in that message in Luxembourg, he said, I am he didn't say coordinator, but I don't remember what he said, but he said, I am from the group, I am from the Portuguese group at Zeitstrom, which we call Rio do Tempo. He said that in Luxembourg. And then here to me, yes, Rio do Tempo thousands of times I have. And I had Carlos de Almeida identifying himself as Carlos de Almeida all those years ago. And then at a certain point, I do not know which year, perhaps 2000 or so, when Carlos de Almeida one day, I asked, how are you, Carlos de Almeida? I used to speak with him like this, very informally. And he said, I am ready to go. I'm ready to depart. Yes. From then on, I never heard of Carlos de Almeida again. But instead, I heard from my own family. My father, my brother Luis, my grandmother, all those people. Others that I do not know, but would give me names. When I asked who is speaking, he said, I am, so Ramiro, something. I am Ramiro from Rio do Tempo, something like that. And, but not Carlos de Almeida, never again. He never spoke. And then I asked them, why doesn't Carlos de Almeida speak? And they said, because the level, the world, they said the world or the level where he is now, he can't speak with you. It is something similar to a sun. Sun, the star. But it's not your sun, they said. It's not your sun, but it's a kind of sun. And so, and no, he can't speak with you. And then sometimes I ask, can he hear me? And they say, yes, he can hear you. See, this is all I'm very conscious that it all seems like a science fiction movie, but this is what happens, you know. I'm just translating what I experience, no more, no less.
Well, what attracted you to this area in the first place? You began your career in the Portuguese diplomatic service. You were the consul general in Tokyo and Delhi and many important stations overseas.
True. I was chargé d'affaires in Tokyo. Well, a replacement, official legal replacement of the ambassador for 2 years or so in Tokyo, yeah. Minister in other places of the embassy and so on. What attracted me to this area of, since I was a little girl, I was always, and my own brother was a merchant marine captain, my brother Luis also, my ex-husband also. We used to read a lot about the classical literature, like Jacques Bergier's, you know Jacques Bergier, what's the name of the book, Carlos? Jacques Bergier, Le Matin des Magiciens.
Yes, the Morning of the Magicians.
Yeah, exactly. And this type of literature, so I always liked it. But what attracted me was the morning of a friend who started experimenting with me here, and Carlos, Carlos, and myself, the three. And she had lost her only son here in the Bay of Vigo in a sailing accident. And she had tried to commit suicide 3 or 4 times because besides he was a very good son, 18-year-old boy and so on, very nice person, so it seems. And trying to help her, I don't remember how we met Carlos, but it was many years ago, so it was through another person. He was building a Kirlian camera. Carlos is into technical things, as I said. And this parapsychologist here in Vigo introduced us. But the other friend, she was in this state of depression, deep depression. So, well, I said, and for some reason, they came to me. Somebody told them that I was interested in this subject. She came to me. I was Consul General here, yes, here in Galicia. And she came and asked for an interview with me. I said, yes. She told me the story. And it was a kind of a very dramatic story. And she said, what can I do? I said, I don't know. I really don't know. I know some theory about, not about ITC, mind you, but about other things, nothing in depth. But I said, why don't we ask Father Pilon? Father Pilon was here in Spain, and I suppose the Spanish-speaking world was a very well-known Jesuit priest who had written about the so-called paranormal. One of the books was, Does the Paranormal Exist? And so on. He was in Madrid. He died years ago. I said, so why don't we speak with Father Pilon? Because, I mean, although I'm not a Catholic, not even a Christian, but, well, he was a person of reputation, good reputation. He was a Jesuit. I said, instead of going to some of these local cheap mediums who really don't know much at all and try to rob you, but I don't want to say these things but well, they're not good here anyway. There are not many either. So we went to Madrid and had lunch with Father Pilon. I invited him for lunch. He accepted. We all went to lunch, not Carlos. Carlos did not come. And then I asked, what do you think, Father, that my friend could try and contact her son? It was her only aim and wish was to contact her son, not contact with anybody else, her son. And he said, Father Pilon, who was already an aged gentleman at the time, he said, why don't you try ITC? And we came back here to Vigo, and I said, ITC? Well, so we started searching for ITC. In the meantime, we met Carlos through this parapsychologist, And Carlos, yes, he knew about ITC from the time when he was in Buenos Aires, I suppose, because he was interested in, not so much in the, he's not interested, he was not, and I suppose he is still not interested in the transcendental side of it. He was interested in the technical side of it. So we knew about this thing, how it worked, but he never believed it worked, he said, and he wrote it. So anyway, we called Carlos, he came, and we started experimenting.
You began, but as I recall, you attempted to receive voices, I think, for a couple of months at least before anything happened.
It was just less than 2 months, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because we started experimenting with the images. Klaus Schreiber method, it's a feedback loop method, and so on. Yes, and got images.
Mm-hmm.
But then we started experimenting with the voices also. And it took 1 month and 3 weeks, something like that. And then the voices started to come. And then there were so many voices. It was all here in my house. We didn't go anywhere. In my house, they used to come here, Carlos and the other friend. So there was no time for everything, for the images and for the voices. And as a matter of fact, I was more interested in the voices because the voices can provide you with information about other spheres, other dimensions. And so I said, at this point I was practically alone. Carlos would come, my friend, once a week, the other lady. But I said, well, let's leave the images, because the images is a very time-consuming method. You have to see frame by frame. And in 1 minute, you have 1,500 frames. So we have to view 1,500 frames one by one on a screen. So I said, well, let's get into the voices. And that's what happened. And stopped experimenting with the images because of time constraints, problems. I was, of course, working here as Consul General, as you said. And although the voices is also work, but it's more exciting. You get the direct contact. You speak and they reply to you. When they started being direct radio voices, that is unmatched, I would say, because you hear them reply to you and calling you by name. So that is, I think that is what I really liked most. And then I started asking questions about the subjects that still interest me and receiving replies. And then so many voices, so many. I don't know if I go to my files, I have the tapes there. I still use a tape recorder. That was the initial one. Maybe I have many hundreds of tapes. Not all direct radio voices, some EVP voices, the ones that you cannot hear directly, that appear recorded in the media that you are using, computer or whatever. But many direct radio voices. And then you have to put them into your computer. Then you have to listen to them. Then you have to transcribe them. Then you have to file them. Then you have to catalog them. And you see, it's also a lot of work. Work that only I did, nobody else. I did the work. They listened. They gave their opinion. Said, yes. Yes, it's okay. It says that, or I don't think so. And so on. But I did the work. And I was the one who was interested, very deeply interested from the beginning. And I'm still very deeply interested because I speak with my father. I speak with my mother, not so much my mother, but my father, yes, my brother. My father has spoke hundreds of times with loud, powerful voice. Say his name, call me by my pet name, which is Bella. Not Anabela, Bella. That's how my family always called me. Sometimes Bellina. I hear my grandmother say, it's your grandmother. And so many things, so many other things.
Well, at one point, you arranged to conduct a study at the local university where they had acoustically shielded rooms, and you published a landmark study in, as I recall, the Journal of Neuro-Quantology.
Exactly, Neuro-Quantology, exactly. I did in 2012, yeah, 12, yes. That's when they published it. It was a two-year study of controlled experiments, because we had an acoustics engineer, sound technician, Philip Newell, who is an international technician, English. He lives here by chance. He happens to live here, rather nearby. And so I got in contact with him. He accepted. He supervised the recordings. It was the equipment of the university. It is the acoustic lab of the of the Faculty of Engineering, really. And I invited operators from other countries, from Portugal, from Germany, and one from Spain also. And we did these controlled experiments with the equipment of the university, different types of equipment, many different ones, different microphones and so on. Not even background acoustic support, which is very useful for the voices, because the voices are built from the background noise. They are modulated on the noise, but no, we had no noise there at the university. Nothing, total silence. And Philip Newell, as I said, he was one of those who recorded Michael, what's the name, Mike Oldfield, is it? He was one of the sound technicians of Mike Oldfield, those special pipes music, you know.
Tubular bells.
Exactly. So he's a technician of high standing. He used to do works in Moscow, in Lisbon. As a matter of fact, he lived in Portugal before coming to live here, in Germany, and so on. So Philip, who besides was a skeptic person, and he said so, was the one who supervised the whole thing as a sound technician. The university allowed us to use their premises, which we did, a top of the class acoustic lab built by Philip Newell for the university. And that's where we did the experiments, and we had results. Of course, the voices are not as loud as in my studio here, because in my studio, I have the radios on, although my radios are tuned into frequencies reserved for the state use. They cannot be interfered with by radio emissions or by, what's the name of this, radio ham. By radio ham operators, they can't enter these frequencies. They are for state use. They are for emergencies, for the use of the state. So all my now 4 radios are tuned into these frequencies, where there are no strenuous voices and no radio emissions and no radio ham. But they make noise. They make noise in my studio. Zzz, and then they change the noise and so on. And they build their voices, even the direct radio voices, so it seems, from that noise. And at university, we had no noise whatsoever. But they used, it's very interesting because they used the voices, some feeble voices, obviously. They couldn't be strong, they couldn't be powerful. There was no background noise. The voice, sometimes like something like some like metallic sound, which was not produced in the acoustic shielded lab, would appear recorded abnormally, paranormally, and then glued to that sound a voice, you see? Or I would swallow, make a noise with my throat, which of course the highly sensitive microphone would capture, and the voice would appear recorded to my breathing or to my swallowing noise. You see? But always feeble, yes.
You had people who were trained listeners who would independently listen to these voices and evaluate what they heard.
Yes, oh yes, of course we had also this Professor Uwe Hartmann. He listened to all the recordings, my friends, the ones who came, and Uwe would listen to recordings because normally the voices replied in Portuguese, yes? And then I would ask Carlos and somebody else to come and listen and say, because it was a very hard work, because there was something like many hundreds of recordings, one with this microphone, the other with a different microphone, simultaneously, you see? This was horrible, time-consuming and tiring work. And yes, all the voices were listened to, or sometimes I would send them as an attachment to an email to somebody who was elsewhere and say, what do you hear, and so on, this type of thing, yes.
From your writings, you indicated that in spite of the fact that you did this in a very professional studio with a skeptical recording engineer supervising everything, you obtained many, many voices under rigorous conditions. You found it almost impossible to interest other people in the scientific community about this work.
Yeah, because as I said, Philip Newell, who was the supervisor of the experiments, he was skeptical, totally. The people at the university, the professors, totally skeptic, and he said so. And he was not at the experiments, but Philip was always there. And but still voices were registered. But as I said, they are very interesting because in the conclusions that were published in that study of Neuro-Quantology, there are two types of voices. The voices that spontaneously appeared recorded while we were informally speaking, for instance, when there was a common experiment with 2 or 3 people, because we did so many experiments. Some were individual, some were 2 or 3 operators there by turns and so on. And before Philip said, let's start the experiment, we would be talking to each other, talking informally, very, very relaxingly, and so on. And then Philip would say, okay, we start, silence. Absolute silence. But before, if we were talking and there was some machine recording, there were also voices, and these voices were loud and strong, and they would comment about what we were saying. Yes? And then during the experiment proper, the formal experiment, total silence, total is total silence. Then the voice is yes, but as I said, either a metallic sound would be recorded abnormally in the machines that were recording, computer, this and that, several machines. And a small, little, very feeble voice would appear recorded, glued to that sound, or to I swallowing, or sometimes something that would do like this, because I or Uwe Hartmann or one of the other operators, and the voice is still be there, but very low amplitude. While when we were chatting between us informally, before the formal experiment, there would appear voices recorded loud and clear. Obviously, they used the acoustic waves of our own talking among ourselves to form their, in which way? No, I don't know in which way. If I knew, I would know a lot. And I don't. I don't know in which way, but I know that it was like this.
Philip Newell, in his analysis of the voices, pointed out that even though they were intelligible, they were not the acoustical signatures of a human voice. They were not produced by anybody's vocal cords.
Exactly, because there are differences in the frequencies. Fundamental frequency and this glottis, how is it called? Voice box, I think, in English, no? Signs of the voice box and so on. And no, some of those voices do not have these characteristics. However, some might have them. Because Carlos, many years ago, when we started, he went once to Barcelona. There was a professor of acoustics, very famous there, who had done the acoustics for the expo when it was in Barcelona, Alfredo Bonavida, Professor Alfredo Bonavida. And he took one of my voices to this professor. And he said, and it was obviously a paranormal voice, and he said, yes, he had the pulses of the voice box, of the glottis. It had, and it was still paranormal, because that also happened. So it's kind of, I would like these words, but I don't like them. Mystery, it is a mystery in a way, because no scientist of orthodox science has been interested to analyze, supervise, and witness these recordings. Yes, Philip Newell, yes, but Philip Newell is not a physicist, he's a sound technician, yes, and skeptic also. And he was there all the time. But that's the only step I could accomplish, really. No more than this. I've been trying to involve scientists, but to no avail so far.
Well, let's talk about the hobbyists. I understand there might be as many as 10,000 people experimenting with ITC.
Or more. According to Francois Brune, the theologian, French theologian, and psychical researcher, not operator. He never experimented, but he would go everywhere in the world to witness the cases that were reported. He was in Luxembourg, in Rivnich with Adolf Holmes. He was a close friend of Ernst Senkowski, my very dear friend, and so on. There were more than 10,000. Francois Brune said around 20,000 people experimenting. And all this started happening not because of us, or me, or the Harsch-Fischbach, no, but because of Konstantine Raudive. When the English translation of breakthrough appeared in England, published by Colin Smythe in 1971, then everybody started experimenting on their own feeling and claiming, I say claiming because I didn't listen to the results, and claiming to obtain contacts with their deceased loved ones. And that's when the thing became spread throughout the world. And from then on, they were called the Raudive voices, if you remember. And that's what really started this big boom of the electronic voices. It was after the publication of Breakthrough by Konstantine Raudive. As a matter of fact, as the book of an operator, Konstantine Raudive's Breakthrough, published initially in German, of course, he lived in Germany, although he was Swedish, born in Latvia, is perhaps the best book ever written on EVP. EVP at the time, it was called. An excellent book. He was surrounded by some of the top scientists of his time, physicists of high level and so on, who even made devices for him. He was also a man of high standing, a psychologist, a student of Carl Gustav Jung. He had been with Friedrich Jürgensen in Sweden and learned of this method from Jürgensen, who was the great pioneer. And he himself was a man of science and of culture, Raudive. And it was because of him that it became so well known and so popular, let's say. And then it never stopped, really, till today, when again it seems to
recurring,
happening again, coming again into blooming again. It never stopped. The voices never stopped. There are times between 71 and now, more or less intense, but they were always happening. High-level contacts in Luxembourg and Germany. Also, you must know her very well. I knew her and I liked her very much. I have photographs with her in my computer. Sarah Estep. I met Sarah Estep. She was the founder of the American EVP Association. Voices of Eternity, isn't it? She was an operator. She was also a pioneer, not with Jürgensen, but a couple of years after Jürgensen. Sarah Estep, lovely lady that I met at one of the conferences that I was invited to in Reno, one of the last ones. And she was there. She died some years ago. She was a good operator. She had wonderful voices, Sarah Esther. So she is a good example in the United States, and there are others. And then there were the associations that were formed in different countries, and they are always there. I mean, the voices, they still happen because I get contacts from people who ask me to listen to their recordings. They are not always what they think they are, but some are. As I think it was William James said, that for, what was it, the White Crow? So if one voice is good, I get many people who write to me and send me recordings. But not all are what they say they are. Not all seem to be paranormal, or to call them a word that I don't like. But some are. And this is sufficient to demonstrate that the phenomenon exists. Besides, of course, the experiments at the Laboratory of Acoustics of the Faculty of Engineering, of all the Harsch-Fischbach contacts that were witnessed by scientists from different countries, by Ernst Senkowski, who was a physicist, by this, I knew his wife, Mary Uphoff, Walter Uphoff. Uphoff. He went to Luxembourg. He was there. He contacted with George Meek. George Meek was there. They contacted not with George Meek, with that man who spoke, that NASA scientist who allegedly spoke through the Spiricom, George Mueller, wasn't it? Yeah. George Mueller through the Spiricom, which has been so defamed, and not with reason, really. The Spiricom did produce voices, and people forget that some of the scientists that George Meek assembled even tried to imitate the voices of the Spiricom with those false larynxes, and they could never reproduce them. But this is never said. What is said is that William O'Neill falsified the voices. You have to prove that to say it, isn't it, Jeff?
Well, there's a tradition amongst ITC operators, I understand, that very often people like Raudive, after they pass on, they communicate from the other side.
Oh, yes. Raudive communicated a lot in Luxembourg. And Adolf Holmes, with the spontaneous computer texts that would appear on the screen of his computer. He was a carpenter. He was not a technician, Adolf Holmes. And yes, the text would be signed by Raudive, by whoever, by the technician, by Dr. Swegensalter, by Jurgensen. Oh, yes. I myself have a voice that says Jurgensen. He doesn't talk too much because my main contacts were with Carlos de Almeida, the head of the Portuguese Brazilian group. So they said at a Zeitstrom called Rio do Tempo. Not with Raudive or Jurgensen, but yes, he communicated many times, as I say, mainly in Luxembourg and in Rivnish with Adolf Holmes, through computer texts, which are the least questionable evidence of ITC, because they appear on a computer screen without any intervention. In the case of Adolf Holmes, he was not at home, because Senkowski has it in his book, and when he was here a couple of times in my house and stayed here, he said Adolf was at the hospital, and still the computer would turn itself on, and an anomalous computer text would appear on the screen of Adolf Holmes' computer. So these are they provide the strongest evidence of ITC, in my opinion, because they are not subjected to interpretation, are they? They appear recorded as a text. So, but it's the orthodox parapsychologists who don't like ITC, but they don't analyze it. You have to like or not like something after you have analyzed, after you have examined it, after you have studied the evidence, after you have read the literature. There are over 100 serious works published on ITC. Serious. I don't mention the non-serious ones, which must be multiple. But to say that it is good or not good, you have to first be informed sufficiently about it, isn't it? And then there are the orthodox scientists. If they don't examine other evidence, they don't examine ITC either. Although, according to the communicators, ITC was devised in the next dimension by scientists so that palpable evidence could be analyzed here in laboratories, as they said.
Which is what you have done, as a matter of fact.
Listen, ask me for the recordings. I will send samples. Only one professor, French professor of mathematics or something, asked me for some voices and I sent them to him. We discussed them and so on. You think that people ask me that they want to listen to what was recorded? No, they don't ask. If they ask me, I will send them and let them examine. But they don't want to. It's an uncomfortable, how do I say, evidence, uncomfortable evidence, yes. As many other types of evidence, like the good mediumship I'm speaking. It also exists, and I know good mediumship evidence is also not analyzed by orthodox scientists, with the exception, of course, Charles Richer and others at the time. But not many, very few, isn't it? Yes, of course, we all know that. So.
You have, over the years, nevertheless, gleaned quite a bit from the conversations you have had. You've actually, in addition to your first book, talking about how you got into the field, you have 2 more books talking about what the voices are actually saying, what they're trying to communicate to you. And what I'd like to do, Anabela, is a second interview where we'll go into that, talk about
thank you.
the knowledge.
Right. All right.
The knowledge that you've learned from these voices. Well, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, Anabela. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you, Jeff. A pleasure also from my side. Thanks for inviting me. Your channel is a great channel. I know very well. I've listened to several of your interviews, which I enjoyed immensely. One of them I will not forget because I got good advice from him. It was an old gentleman that you interviewed, old, I say oldish, he was almost 90, something like that, gave you advice about the vitamins and so on. I don't remember his name.
Oh, that would Dr. Norman Shealy.
He was great. You know, I really enjoyed him, yeah. So, yes.
He's a wonderful man.
Oh, lovely. Very healthy, very energetic, yes, and very sensible, very knowledgeable also, yes. Oh, I enjoyed that very much. And others. Thank you, Jeff, for inviting me. Yes, of course, I will be at your full disposal.
Well, thank you again. And for those of you listening and watching, thank you for being with us.